Buenas tardes. Bien, vamos a pasar a presentar a nuestro keynote speaker, pero antes de presentarlo quería comentarles que en las bolsas que habéis recogido en registro hay unas tarjetas en blanco, por si a medida que vayáis oyendo la ponencia queréis hacer alguna pregunta y se la entreguéis a las azafatas para que me las traigan, porque intentaremos que haya a lo mejor 5 o 10 minutos para preguntas una vez finalizada la ponencia. ¿Sí? Están dentro de vuestras bolsas. Right, are you ready? Wait. Well, so when I knew I was going to be presenting Peter MEDGYES, I went to the internet to have a look at all the things he has done and achieved throughout his life. And I couldn't bring it with me because it was like an encyclopedia. So I left it in Madrid. Well, I've known him for a few years and we have met in different occasions and conferences. And I must recognize that I have a soft spot for Peter MEDGYES. Yes, I never told him this. Well, needless to say that his communication ability and his vast expertise in the field of languages make him one of the top-level representatives of this area, about languages in general. But there is something I really love about Peter MEDGYES, which is his wonderful and incredible sense of humor. And you will be able to check it in a few minutes. Well, now if we go to more serious things, and talking about some of the things I could take from the internet, Peter MEDGYES is commander of the most excellent order of the British Empire, Professor Emeritus of Applied Linguistics and Language Pedagogy at University of Budapest. During his career, he was a school teacher, teacher training, vice rector, deputy state secretary, and ambassador of Hungary. He was on the editorial advisory board of several journals of international reputation, including Language Teaching, English Language Teaching Journal, and Language and Education. He has been a plenary speaker in 50 countries. He has written and edited 40 books and about 200 papers. The Language Teacher, Laughing Matters, Golden Age, 20 Years of Foreign Language Education in Hungary, and Reflections on Language Education. He's the author of The Non-Native Teacher, for me, one of the most inspiring books for non-native teachers like us. His main professional interests lie in language policy and teacher education, with a special emphasis on non-native English-speaking teachers. Well, I'm sure his speech today will instill in all of us the courage, the confidence, and the inspiration we need to go on working in the difficult but exciting world of bilingual education and foreign languages. Professor MEDGYES, the floor is yours.
Virginia, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. Very few people in Hungary know where Badajoz is, but now they know, because I've told everyone in Hungary where this wonderful city is. So the title of my presentation is Always Look on the Bright Side, which I stole from Monty Python. I'm sorry. Being a non-native teacher. And here is the introduction. More than 20 years ago, I had a paper published in the ERT journal, followed by a full-length book. As I was working on the two pieces, I had the gut feeling that I was going to open a can of worms. However, not in my wildest dream did I imagine that there were so many worms in that can. In those two studies, I investigated the differences between native and non-native speaking teachers of English, for whom I used the acronyms NEST and non-NEST. Differences, but aren't we all equal? I hear you ask. Of course, there are far more similarities than differences between the two groups, and some of those differences are fairly visible too. Both nest and non-nest have 2 ears, 2 eyes, one nose. We were born 30, 50, 100 years ago. Many of us are married with children, and sadly, all of us will die. In addition, we share the same ideas, problems, and dreams. We often have similar qualifications, length of experience, and technical repertoire too. Why highlight the differences then? I hear you ask. Because there are differences, and quite a few of them too. For good or ill, we fall into 2 distinct groups, nest and non-nest. So, the aims of my lecture are to compare nest and non-nest, pinpoint the differences, focus on non-nest. By the way, let me ask you, who claims to be a non-native speaker of English? Hands up, please. Oh, I'm so glad that we are in majority. So I can say all the dirty things about those. And in addition, I try and touch upon our disadvantages compared to nest. And finally, I will dwell longer on our advantages. However, my primary goal for the next 50 minutes is to give your self-confidence a boost. I want you, dear non-nest, to take pride in being what you are, non-native speaker teachers of English, and in order to clarify what I mean, I advance 2 sets of hypotheses. Let's take a look at set 1 first. My first assumption underlines that nest and non-nest differ in terms of the language proficiency, with the sad implication that nests are more proficient users of English than non-nests. This is pretty obvious since they are native speakers of English, which we, non-nest, are not. And let me tell you that the superior command applies to all 4 skills: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Let me justify this statement with reference to my own English language competence. To save time, I'll identify only 2 of my weak spots, namely listening skills and speaking skills. So first, listening. I don't understand the jokes of English-speaking stand-up comedians. I've tried several times in vain. Why? Because comedians say the punchline fast and under the breath. By the time I figure out the joke, the comedian is 10 sentences ahead of me. I wish he'd slow down and repeat the punchline, like this. Here is a joke, so you have to laugh at it. I'll show when you can begin to laugh. 2 friends talking, one of them. Have you heard the latest Hungarian joke? Then I say, careful, I come from Hungary. That's all right. I shall tell it slowly. Recently, I watched the American series running under the title Breaking Bad. Oh, I see some of you guys. I've seen it too. Now, let me tell you that I could not understand a word of it. So after the first part, I decided to watch it with English subtitles because I wanted to enjoy the movie. This is about my listening. And here is speaking. With due modesty, I'm going to be a fairly fluent speaker of English. even though I speak English with a touch of Hungarian accent, I'm more fluent than most non-natives. However, not half as fluent as some of my native friends. When my son was born, my friends often said, "You are an English teacher, your wife is an English teacher too. How lucky your son is. He will learn English from the cradle." Nonsense. We kept talking to him in Hungarian. Why? Mainly because we don't know babies speak in English. Why are you laughing? Do you understand? Both my parents were Hungarian, and I was 27 years old when I first visited an English-speaking country. For me, speaking English, honestly, is like wearing an uncomfortable costume. Too tight, 100% polyester. It's all sham and artificial. If scratched beneath the surface, my utterances are hollow, unsuitable for carrying personal messages. Well-practiced hollow phrases tied together on a string. And it's not only that I'm less fluent than native speakers, but I'm less accurate, less appropriate, and less colorful too. Worse still, I'm unable to express my emotions in English. I can't give vent to my anger in English, for example. Anger. Let me illustrate this with an anecdote. A few years ago, I went to a shop in London to buy a shirt. The shop assistant asked, "What size?" "I don't know exactly," I stammered. "Men of your age should know what size they are," he said, and turned his back on me. Gobsmacked, my subtle English language competence evaporated without a trace. In Hungarian, I would have known what to say. I didn't know that I was talking to a Hungarian. Let's face it, in English, I'm a boring person. Maybe in Hungarian too, but that's nothing. Laughing. But this applies to you too, dear friends. Non-native speakers are dumb, and we non-nest teachers are the worst off. No offense meant. In order to prove that this is more than the whimper of a pathetic non-nest, I collected questionnaire and interview data from several hundred teachers, 325 to be precise, a mixed bag of nest and non-nest. And lo and behold, the overwhelming majority shared my queries and qualms. This being the case, non-nest had better accept with resignation that our English language competence is not on a par with any of our native peers. Therefore, if native speakers tell you that your English is as good as theirs, do not believe a word of it. They are either lying or acting politically correctly, PC, on comparing you to an uneducated native speaker such as an English football hooligan. What I've said so far is not very uplifting, is it? Instead of succumbing to despair, however, remember that every cloud has a silver lining. I knew this phrase in Hungarian, and then I didn't know the English equivalent. Every cloud has a silver lining. So I ran for my dictionary and looked it up in a Hungarian English dictionary, and that's what I found. So I'm so proud. I'm always learning. Time to examine the second assumption. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. Nest and non-nest differ in terms of their teaching behavior. On the basis of the collated data, I specify these differences in a tabular form. Here it is. You can't see it? Not to worry. Take this pair of binoculars. Now, these data prove that indeed nest and non-nest teach differently. However, the first two hypotheses led me to the third. 1, 2, 3. The discrepancy in language proficiency accounts for most of the differences found in the teaching behavior. After all, if nest and non-nest use the language differently, they teach it differently too. I considered the cause and effect relationship so evident that I didn't even bother to prove it or to seek empirical evidence to confirm it. And fourthly, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourthly, I claim that nest and non-nest can be equally good teachers, but each on their own terms. Before I let you know about my respondent's answer, let me take a straw poll. Here is a tricky one. Suppose, or just suppose, you were the principal of a commercial language school here in Spain. If there were a vacancy for a teaching post, who would you prefer to employ? Only a nest? Preferably a nest? Makes no difference? Can't tell. Who would go for only a nest? Hands up. Don't you dare. Out. Yeah, preferably a nest. Hands up. A language school. A few hands. I can see in the back. Of course, they are sitting in the back so that I can't see them. Makes no difference. Hands up. Ah, a lot of hands. I'm glad, thank you. And I can't tell. A few hands. Okay. Well, the respondents in my survey were rather divided on this issue, like you were. While nearly half of them agreed, the other half expressed their preference for nest or non-nest in roughly equal proportions. And at this point, I couldn't help asking myself, how come that non-nest can be as good at nest despite their linguistic handicap? What gives us, non-nest, a competitive edge? Surely, this is only possible if we have certain attributes that nest are lacking. Okay, well, what exactly are these attributes? Now, in order to be able to answer these questions, and of course cheer you up a little bit, because I can see that some of you have begun to cry, I put forward a second set of hypotheses which displays the bright side of being an honest. This time, however, I dispensed with empirical research. Instead, I relied upon my personal experience and intuition and picked the brains of a few fellow teachers. Now, let me briefly elaborate on each of these 6 hypotheses. My first claim is that non-nest can provide a better learner model than nest. After all, stop to think of this. We didn't acquire the English language like our nest colleagues. We learned it at school, just like our students, shedding tears of pain in the process. In a sense, nests are inimitable models. We are imitable. By the way, does this word exist in English? Imitable. I know inimitable exists, but imitable. Well, I've created this word, this adjective. Peter, wonderful. Yes, so non-nest can produce miracles, apparently. For non-nest, native speaker proficiency is a mirage, as I tried to point out. What we can set as a realistic goal is a high level of non-native speaker proficiency. And at this point you may ask, But is there a correlation between linguistic performance and teaching performance? And my tentative answer is yes. But I'm also aware that success is a complex issue. There's more to it than mere language proficiency. What? Teaching qualifications, experience, personal traits, motivation, love of children, and so on and so forth. What I'm suggesting is that a good command of English is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for successful teaching. If language proficiency were the only attribute that mattered, NEST would be better teachers by definition, which they are not. I'm sorry. And now, here is my second. 1, 2, yes. Non-NEST can teach language learning strategies more effectively than NEST. We, non-NEST, were language learners, and still are. Successful language learners into the bargain. If we weren't, we wouldn't have become language teachers, would we? We are conscious of which learning strategies have worked for us and which ones have not. We know, another word from the dictionary, we know every nook and cranny on the road. Oh, I always feel so satisfied when I can use these idiomatic phrases. The trouble is that I can't. I always have to go and check in the dictionary if I want to say something sophisticated and subtle, which native teachers can simply off the top of their head. You are in a very advantageous position. Advantages or advantageous? Where's the stress? Advantages? Who would go for advantages? Advantageous? You are the winners. Advantageous. Again, I checked it in the dictionary. That's what I have to do all the time. So, as I said, we know every nook and cranny of the road that leads to proficiency in English. NEST have never gone down that road, certainly not with respect to learning English. Given this, I claim that we are better at making our students' learning process effective, fast, and easy. Relatively easy, that is. And here's my third argument. Non-NEST can supply more information about the English language than NEST. As I pointed out, we know less English than our native peers. On the other hand, we know more about English than they do, and a lot more. We have amassed huge amounts of information about the English language during our own learning process. For instance, we are aware how difficult it is for a foreigner to use the word enough. I hope you haven't had enough of me, so 20 or so minutes. So enough, it's a difficult word. I don't know whether you've ever come to realize this, I have. And here are a few sentences to prove my point. My car is big enough. Great. Enough always comes after an adjective. There are more than enough cars on the road of Budapest. Okay? So enough always comes before a noun. My Volkswagen isn't a big enough car for my family. If there's an adjective-noun combination, enough comes after the adjective, but before the noun. And here's one more. There are more than enough big cars on the roads of Budapest. Oops. Enough preceding an adjective-noun compound? What shall I do now? And here's the final sentence. This should be explanation enough why the mayor of Budapest considers introducing a toll in the city centre. Enough after a noun. I've had enough. Or, here is a typical Hungarian English mistake, Hungarian English mistake. A friend of mine, David, asked me, Peter, did you know that Brad Pitt was 53 last year? And then I say, wow, she looks much younger. And then David looks at me like this. She? But Brad Pitt is a man. Now, in explanation, in Hungarian there is only one personal pronoun to cover all three genders. Therefore, we constantly confuse he, she, and it. David, my English friend, is aware of this. I'm also aware, but I can't help making this mistake, even at my relatively high level of English. By the way, don't get me wrong, Hungarians may be genderless, but not sexless. Carry on laughing. And this brings me on to my fourth point. 1, 2, 3, 4. Non-nest can anticipate and prevent difficulties more effectively than nest. Nest can better tell what is right and what is wrong in English. Non-nest, on the other hand, can better perceive what is easy and what is difficult. We are equipped with special antennae, a kind of sixth sense. We can predict what's likely to go wrong even before our students open their mouths. You know, she's about to say something. I know she's going to make a mistake. She's going to make a mistake. Oops, she's made a mistake. And then I'm so glad I was able to predict. And then I can punish her for that mistake, which I often do. No. Now, Nest can't do this. This is an asset, but also a risk. Wrong, wrong, wrong again, I keep hearing from my non-Nest colleagues. We non-Nest tend to overcorrect and penalize mistakes. Please don't. Fifthly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. I argue that Nests show more empathy to the needs and problems of students. More empathy than Nest. Of course, this is not to say that non-Nests were born to be more empathetic than Nest. In a language classroom, however, we can automatically slip into our students' shoes. Why? Because we come from the same linguistic, social, cultural, and educational background as our students. We have a pretty clear picture of what they feel, talk, think, and dream about. We can often understand each other with the wink of an eye. Nest can't, simply because they come from a different culture. And finally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here is number 6. I assume that non-Nest can benefit from the student's native language. For a long time, the monolingual principle was never challenged. The native language was all but expelled from the language classroom. However, I'm glad to say it has made a comeback. This being the case, we have an enormous advantage over Nest, provided that the group we are teaching is monolingual. So only Spaniards sitting in your classroom. In the final analysis, Nest and non-Nest may turn out to be equally good teachers because their respective strengths and weaknesses balance each other out. Since each group can offer competencies of which the other group is in short supply, the ideal school is one, what kind of school? In which there is a good mix of Nest and non-Nest who work in close collaboration with one another. I'll come back to this towards the end of my talk. Okay, easier said than done. I've been criticized. And I'm used to being criticized, I don't mind. You know, at the beginning of my talk, I was referring to the can of worms. By the way, would you like to see that can again? After the first publication, my first publications on the Nest, non-Nest issue, I was fiercely attacked from various quarters. Linguists rejected the division of natives and non-natives. Can anyone define who is a native and who is a non-native, they asked. And their answer was a resounding no. and a vehement opponent of the native, non-native speaker separation Quake Day, went so far as to lend his book the title, "The Native Speaker is Dead." Did you hear native speaker friends? Any native speakers here? Yeah. So, yeah. Although I readily admit that the native, non-native dichotomy doesn't stand up to close linguistic scrutiny, the majority of us still fall into either this or that category. Who would query, for instance, that I'm a non-native speaker of English, whereas David, my British friend, is a native speaker? Mind you, there are lots of other things in the universe which defy clear-cut definitions. The philosopher Karl Popper said, for example, that if physicists in the 19th century had been bogged down in the definitional problems of the phenomenon light, the electric bulb might never have been invented. As if to close the polemic, the famous linguist Halliday quipped that the native speaker is a useful term precisely because it cannot be closely defined. It was not only the linguists who attacked me. Up rose the stalwarts of PC, or the PC movement too. They objected to the prefix non in the term non-native, stressing that it had a pejorative ring to it. No human being is inferior to another, we are all equal, they queried. But who said that we are not equal? Different does not imply better or worse. Different simply means different, with no value judgment attached to it. All different, all equal. Now, another band of critics, teacher educators, and their ilk. They complain that while I scourged non-nets for their linguistic shortcomings, I gave short shrift to other attributes, such as teaching qualifications, length of experience, individual traits, level of motivation, love of students, and many more. Let me make it clear. I set high store by these other attributes. I paid them little tribute merely for research purposes. The validity of a statement, as we all know, can be proven only if all variables are kept constant except for one variable, which in this case was language proficiency. All I claimed was that all other things being equal, the better a native speaker speaks English, the better teacher he or she is likely to be. However, my most vociferous opponents were non-nest advocacy groups. They fumed that the separation of the two groups fueled discriminatory practices against non-nest. And they were right too. It's a sorry fact that applications from even highly qualified and experienced non-nest often get turned down in favor of nests with no comparable credentials. However, ladies and gentlemen, I doubt that this is an overriding concern in most parts of the world. The percentage of non-nest in search of a teaching job in English-speaking countries is relatively low. Non-nest typically work in EFL environments at home and not in ESL contexts abroad. Anyway, forcibly removing the label non-nest is no more than window dressing. Like it or not, nest and non-nest are different species, 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 species. Which is correct? Species, who would go for species? Answer. Who would go for species? Both are correct, as a matter of fact. Now, on the credit side, for all the backlash, I trust that my efforts paid off because they launched an avalanche of research on this conundrum, replicating my studies. Many researchers confirmed or fine-tuned the conclusions I had arrived at. Others followed different research agendas, provided new perspectives, and generated novel ideas, in addition to scores of research papers on this topic. 7 or maybe more full-length books have come out in the past 20 years. Be that as it may, here are the publications, the study of the nest, non-nest issue has come into its own. Furthermore, non-nest, who had seldom made their voices heard in the past, were prompted to contribute to this line of research, and they did ever so eagerly. This was a niche which offered us plenty of opportunity, and offered not only us, but you as well, ladies and gentlemen, for gaining recognition in the academic work. George Brown is right in noting that this development is an indication of the empowerment of non-native researchers who are no longer hesitant to acknowledge themselves as non-native speakers and venture into uncharted territory. Finally, not finally, I'm going on for another few minutes, but finally, from these points, take it as a threat, please. I like to think that my studies, but especially the follow-up lecture that I'm giving now, in many parts of the world, succeeded in boosting non-nest self-confidence. The message that it is not a shame to be a non-native seems to have gone down well. Non-nests would often come up to me after my lecture saying that from now on they would take pride in who they were. And I hope you will come up to me saying, I'm no longer ashamed of myself being a non-nest. And I receive lots of emails too. I'm expecting and looking forward to your emails as well, adorned with smileys. Speaking of shame, here is another straw poll I'd like to take. Suppose that you are still the principal of the language school I referred to 20 minutes ago, and you finally decided to employ a non-nest. She's a near native speaker of English. Before she went to teach her first class, what would you tell her to do? What would you tell her to do? And there are 3 options. Pretend to be a native speaker of English, reveal your non-native identity, or do as you please. Who would go for option 1? Pretend to be a native speaker of English. Hands up, please. Hands up. Reveal your non-native identity. I am a proud owner of the Spanish language, which I'm not. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish. So, who would go for this? Reveal your non-native identity. Hands up. And who would say, do as you please? This seems to be a slight majority. Let me share with you a story now. Yes? Many, many years ago, I was a Fulbright scholar in the United States at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Or as the Brits would say, Los Angeles. Anyway, it's not an English word. And I went there, and I was supposed to teach Hungarian language, Hungarian literature, Hungarian culture. And when I arrived there, I had a wonderful mentor who was my professor, Professor Kaplan. And I said to him after I arrived, here I am, Professor Kaplan, to teach Hungarian language, Hungarian literature, and Hungarian culture. And he looked at me and said, Peter, nobody here is interested in the Hungarian language. Come on. I was really very sad what he said. But Peter, you can teach that group of Oriental students English. And I said, Professor Kaplan, I'm a non-native speaker of English. He said, they will not notice that. And I was really in a very precarious situation. So I went in to teach, and the first thing I did was I confessed that I was I was not native speaker of English. And then those Oriental students were a little bit stunned, gobsmacked. But after a few weeks, you know, as I was going to teaching, they became more and more close to me. And they began to appreciate the fact that I was a non-native speaker of English, and yet I was able to put two sentences together, which they were not able to do. And I set a model for them, in a sense. If this Hungarian, or wherever he comes from, you know, was able to learn the English language at such a level, we might also stand a chance, right? And later on, you know, towards the end of my half a year, I was teaching them for half a year. You know, one of the Japanese students came up, and we became so friendly with each other. He came up to me one day and he said, "May I say something to you in private?" And I said, "Yes, sure." We moved to one corner. And he said, "Yesterday something terrible happened." He told, "What?" "I kissed an American girl on the lips." And I said, "So, big deal?" He said, "Do you think I might have contracted AIDS?" Really worry about that. By the way, I had a lot of problems with the American language. It's a different language from the British. It's not only Breaking Bad, it happened a long time ago. Professor Kaplan, you know, my professor, after about a fortnight, as the British would say, or probably said 2 weeks, after 2 weeks, Professor Kaplan came up to me and said, "Peter, just call me Bob." And I said, "I'm sorry, Professor Kaplan, what did you say?" He said, "Just call me Bob." I'm sorry, I still don't understand. And he looked at me and said, "You, Peter, me, Bob." Is that clear? So I need a little bit of getting used to it. Okay, let's move on. I still have got some time. Yeah, quite a lot of time. Yes, when less reigns supreme. Another nice phrase, jot this down if you don't know. Reign supreme, again, I looked it up in the dictionary. I didn't know until I looked it up. Now, let's take a look at what the ELT operation was like before non-nest self-awakening process began. From time immemorial, native speakers were regarded as models of the proper use of English that every learner was expected to imitate. Needless to say, non-native teachers were the worst off. After all, for us, an excellent command of English was and still is a good predictor of professional success. Since there's no way we can emulate NEST in terms of language proficiency, many of us have developed a more or less serious form of inferiority complex. And this nasty behavior is this girl, another fellow non-native. This nasty feeling is well expressed in the title of a paper, Children of a Lesser English, you know, which is after the film Children of a Lesser Law, some 20 or 30 years ago, which is a paraphrase of the American movie. In his oddly debated book, Philipson introduced the center versus periphery dichotomy. To the center belong powerful English-speaking countries in the West, while the periphery mostly consists of underdeveloped countries where English is a second or foreign language. Another construct similar to Philipson's is the banner descent, distinction created by Holiday. While banner typically comprises private sector adult institutions in Britain, America, Australasia, and North America, TESOP includes state education in tertiary, T, secondary, and primary levels anywhere else in the world. Both authors pointed out that since ELT was an extremely profitable business, organizations and individuals in the center, that is banner countries, had high stakes in maintaining its operation. NEST and their accomplices consider themselves not only the sole repository of the English language, but also the gatekeepers of proper English ELT methodology, even though their ideas had no roots in and were inimical to educational traditions of the periphery, that is, TESA. They all arrived from the hub to act the smart aleck. Regretfully, for a long time, we accepted nest superiority unconditionally, giving preference to import products over homegrown goods. But I'm glad, ladies and gentlemen, that paradise is lost to native speakers. To begin with, today, non-native speakers of English far outnumber native speakers. According to rough estimates, only 1 out of 4 speakers of English is a native speaker. This being the case, the question of ownership inevitably arises. Can a minority group, that is, native speakers of English, retain their hegemony? Hegemony. And continue to arbitrate what's right and what's wrong in English language usage. Now, there are all kinds of, this is a very controversial issue and I don't want to go into this, but nowadays I'm glad to say that the paradise is lost to the native English word, and we non-natives also can have our say. There are two more issues that I'd like to bring up, and one is, Yes, English as a lingua franca. There are 2 areas which have generated a great deal of interest in the recent years. One of them is English as a lingua franca. Scores of studies have attempted at disentangling the complexities of F, both as a social phenomenon and a language barrier. However, while acknowledging the socio-educational value of such efforts, I have certain reservations about their legitimacy. Until I've seen the grammar of F, I can't give it full credit, and therefore I ill-advise learners of English and their teachers to throw away the good old grammar book. There is no better way for the time being than turn to native speaker norm as a benchmark against which to monitor output. And the second area is young learners. And this has gained momentum these days, and it has to do with the recognition that learners of English are getting younger and younger year after year. In more and more countries, English is introduced as early as lower primary school and even the kindergarten, maybe the crèche. It looks as if English is catching up with the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, as a basic skill, and thus becoming a second rather than a foreign language in the school curriculum. Actually, it's not even a subject anymore. Obviously, the job of teaching the young poses new challenges which the ELT profession cannot yet meet. This concerns both teacher supply and methodological expertise. Today, we need a lot more teachers who are intimately familiar with the local educational environment than ever before. And let me reiterate, ladies and gentlemen, that nests are less capable of coming up to these expectations than their non-native peers, simply because they speak the English language, oddly enough, as their mother tongue. Suffice it to say, the traditional EFL model is in decline. And next, the last bulwarks of native speaker supremacy are losing ground at an ever-fasting speed. At an ever-faster speed, I wanted to say. I don't know how to say this. Please note that according to current estimates, out of 12 million non-nest, 97% of the profession consists of non-nest.
Now, let's take a look at what the ELT operation was like before non-nest self-awakening process began. From time immemorial, native speakers were regarded as models of the proper use of English that every learner was expected to imitate. Needless to say, non-native teachers were the worst off. After all, for us, an excellent command of English was and still is a good predictor of professional success. Since there's no way we can emulate NEST in terms of language proficiency, many of us have developed a more or less serious form of inferiority complex. And this nasty thing is this girl, another fellow non-native. This nasty feeling is well expressed in the title of a paper, Children of a Lesser English, you know, which is after the film Children of a Lesser God, some 20 or 30 years ago, which is a paraphrase of the American movie. In his hotly debated book, Philipson introduced the center versus periphery dichotomy. To the center belong powerful English-speaking countries in the West, while the periphery mostly consists of underdeveloped countries where English is a second or foreign language. Another construct similar to Philipson's is the banner Desse, distinction created by Holiday, while banner typically comprises private sector adult institutions in Britain, America, Australasia, and North America. TESOP includes state education in tertiary, T, secondary, and primary levels anywhere else in the world. Both authors pointed out that since ELT was an extremely profitable business, organizations and individuals in the center, that is, banner countries, had high stakes in maintaining its operation. NEST and their accomplices considered themselves not only the sole repository of the English language, but also the gatekeepers of proper English ELT methodology, even though their ideas had no roots in and were inimical to education traditions of the periphery, that is, TESOP. They all arrived from the hub to act the smart aleck. Regretfully, for a long time, we accepted NEST superiority unconditionally, giving preference to import products over homegrown goods. But I'm glad, ladies and gentlemen, the paradise is lost to native speakers. To begin with, today, non-native speakers of English far outnumber native speakers. According to rough estimates, only 1 out of 4 speakers of English is a native speaker. This being the case, the question of ownership inevitably arises. Can a minority group, that is, native speakers of English, retain their hegemony? Hegemony. And continue to arbitrate what's right and what's wrong in English language usage. Now, there are all kinds of, this is a very controversial issue and I don't want to go into this, but nowadays I'm glad to say that the paradise is lost to the native English word, and we non-natives also can have our say. There are two more issues that I'd like to bring up, and one is, Yes, English as a lingua franca. There are 2 areas which have generated a great deal of interest in the recent years. One of them is English as a lingua franca. Scores of studies have attempted at disentangling the complexities of F, both as a social phenomenon and a language barrier. However, while acknowledging the socio-educational value of such efforts, I have certain reservations about their legitimacy until I have seen the grammar of F I can't give it full credit. And therefore, I ill-advise learners of English and their teachers to throw away the good old grammar book. There is no better way for the time being than turn to native speaker norm as a benchmark against which to monitor output. And the second area is young learners. And this has gained momentum these days, and it has to do with the recognition that learners of English are getting younger and younger year after year. In more and more countries, English is introduced as early as lower primary school and even the kindergarten, maybe the crèche. It looks as if English is catching up with the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, as a basic skill, and thus becoming a second rather than a foreign language in the school curriculum. Actually, it's not even a subject anymore. Obviously, the job of teaching the young poses new challenges which the ERT professional cannot yet meet. This concerns both teacher supply and methodological expertise. Today, we need a lot more teachers who are intimately familiar with the local educational environment than ever before. And let me reiterate, ladies and gentlemen, the nests are less capable of coming up to these expectations than their non-native peers, simply because they speak the English language, oddly enough, as their mother tongue. Suffice it to say, the traditional ELF model, EFL model, is in decline. And NEST, the last bulwarks of native speaker supremacy, are losing ground at an ever-fasting speed. At an ever-fasting speed, I want to say. Please note that according to current estimates, out of 12 million non-nest, 97% of the profession consists of non-nest. Hooray, hooray, hooray! So, you may ask, what is to be done then? What's our job? Well, with a new paradigm looming large, I believe that a fundamental rethink of steps to be taken in language policy and practice is required. Teacher trainers, in particular, bear an increased responsibility for preparing prospective teachers how to adapt to the rapid transformation of education. And it is with these caveats in mind that I propose a 9-point action plan, where some of these points have been touched upon in this talk. Others are waiting to be put on the agenda of ELT experts and decision makers. And here are the 9 points. 1, I believe that an adequate teacher supply to satisfy the exponential growth of demand for English should be ensured. Secondly, work on establishing norms of English as a lingua franca should be intensified. 3, more heed should be paid to the special needs of young learners. 4thly,
and language integrated learning, LEO, in schools should be broadened, bilingual education, in other words. 5, information and communication technology should be factored into the curriculum of teacher education. 6thly, the integration of classroom and out-of-school learning opportunities should be reinforced. 7, language improvement courses for non-NES should constitute a fundamental component of teacher education curricula. 8, NES job applicants prepare to stay for a longer period of time in a foreign country, for a longer period of time, not just jet in, jet out experts who come for 2 days, for a longer period, rather willing to become expats, so to speak. They should be prioritized. And finally, enhanced opportunities for collaboration of NEST and non-NEST should be created. And with this in mind, yes, this is me. This is the puppet.
Beautiful words, Peter. You've nearly made me cry. However, you haven't answered the crucial question. Who's worth more? The nest or the non-nest?
Come on. This is an absurd question.
Okay, let me put it this way. Who is the ideal nest and who is the ideal non-nest?
Well, the ideal teacher is one who is well qualified and experienced. Don't waffle, Peter. These are the similarities. What are the distinguishing features? Okay then, the ideal nest is a professional who speaks the local language and is familiar with the local culture. In this regard, Sylvia Richardson said in her plenary at a recent IETF conference, quote, "Beware, there are two disadvantages in global settings. One, not knowing English. Two, knowing only English."
And who is the ideal non-nest?
The ideal non-nest is one whose command of English is at near native level. Let us not delude ourselves. A high level of language proficiency remains a make or break requirement.
You said that a good nest should be familiar with the local culture. How about a good non-nest?
She should be well versed in the culture, or other cultures in plural, of English-speaking countries.
Britain, USA, Australia,
And the whole world. Don't forget that English has become the universal lingua franca. The ideal teacher is multilingual and multicultural. In this sense, too, the ideal nest and non-nest stand quite close to each other, even though they arrive from different directions.
do we need both species then?
By all means, nest and non-nest serve equally useful purposes, but each in their own ways. Let's not blur the differences.
Peter, time for the punchline.
I shall say it slowly. Okay, in an ideal school, there should be a good mix of nest and non-nest who complement each other in their strengths and weaknesses. Each group should contribute with competencies of which the other group is in short supply.
Sitting in opposite trenches?
Oh no. Nest and non-nest must collaborate as closely as possible. At the end of the day, we are all friends. Any questions?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Peter. We've seen that you know multiple languages and you are a very good actor as well. So perhaps next time maybe the Oscar goes to Peter. Okay, I've got a question for you here and then I've got a what is your opinion about the argument given in the companion volume of the European Framework for Reference, written in March 2018, on the non-native teachers saying that what we should teach now is lingua franca, not native English. Language and or so, translating, or such purpose no less seem better. Did you understand the question?
I did. Yes, it's very easy to answer questions because if I don't understand the question, then I can say something, anything, as it is to an answer. But in this case, I know whether we should teach British or American English or Australian English on the one hand, or whether we should teach English as a lingua franca. The trouble is, lingua franca does exist, but it's not been fully described yet. There have been all kinds of initiatives by Jennifer Jenkins and Barbara Seinhofer, but they didn't really describe the English language the way as, I don't know, Jeffrey Leach did many, many years ago, and other people. So my advice, or who am I to give advice, but who else? My advice would be that perhaps we should give as many opportunities for students to listen to all kinds of Englishes from wherever it comes, but at the same time, when it comes to teaching the English language, we still have to have some norms. So for example, if I begin to teach an elementary class, and I have to teach the word, what's this called? It's not a table, a lectern. If I want to teach the word lectern, I have to pronounce it in some way. I can't pronounce it as a lectern, okay? So I either try and pronounce it in an American way or a British way. Some kind of norm needs to be stuck to, I think. So listening is different from speaking. But of course we all speak, we non-native speakers, we all speak the English language with our own accent, which is more or less related to some kind of native speaking norm.
Another question for you. English as lingua franca. What are the main educational implications? Educational implications.
That's what I've just said.
Because they couldn't understand, you know, they were 4 or 5 years old, and they couldn't understand why Daddy speaks this absolutely unintelligible language to them. What should we do, they ask themselves. So I would say, I wouldn't teach my own kids. So when my third kid, a boy this time, came, then I decided, well, we were lucky, because we lived in Syria for 4 years, and my son went to an American kindergarten and the American school there, so for him it was easy.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you so much.
Now it's time for a coffee.